Two old friends, a balcony, some parakeets flying into the trees, and a conversation neither of them knew was the last one they'd ever have. For over 3 years, Geddy Lee sat on that secret. He watched his bandmate, his friend of nearly 5 decades, fight a brutal disease in complete privacy, while fans online speculated, made up rumors, and sometimes even got angry that Rush wasn't touring. And Lee couldn't say a word. Now, years later, Geddy Lee has finally opened up about what actually happened in Neil Peart's final months, when including the very last thing Peart ever said to him, sitting on that balcony. It's one of the most quietly devastating stories in rock history, and today I'm going to walk you through all of it: Feliz, the final visit, the secret they had to keep, and what's happened to Rush's legacy since. Stay till the end, because the story of how Lee and Alex Lifeson decided to bring Rush's music back is just as emotional as the goodbye itself. Before we get to the ending, it's worth remembering exactly who Rush was losing. Neil Peart joined Rush in 1974, stepping in as the band's drummer and, almost immediately, its primary lyricist. That combination alone made him unusual in rock. Most drummers keep time. Peart did that, widely considered one of the most technically gifted drummers in rock history, while also writing the words that Geddy Lee sang, the philosophical, literary, science fiction-tinged lyrics that gave Rush albums like 2112, Moving Pictures, and Permanent Waves their identity. For close to 40 years, that partnership between Lee, Lifeson, and Peart produced one of the most respected catalogs in rock music. Then in 2015, after decades of touring, Rush played what would become their final live shows and quietly stepped away from the road. Nobody outside the band's inner circle knew that just a few years later, they'd be facing something far more serious than retirement. In 2016, Neil Peart was diagnosed with glioblastoma, (CA), an aggressive form of brain cancer. And from that point forward, for roughly 3.5 years, almost nobody outside his closest circle knew. Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson knew, they visited him, they supported him, and they had to say almost nothing about it publicly, because privacy was exactly what Peart wanted. He'd always been famously private, even during Rush's biggest years, to Levgen this year Jernsolov Rimum. He avoided a lot of the typical rock star spotlight, preferring long motorcycle rides between tour stops to hotel parties. So when Rush didn't announce a new tour, when Peart didn't appear anywhere, fans speculated. Rumors circulated. Some fans got frustrated, even upset, wondering publicly why Rush seemed to have vanished. And Lee has since admitted, in his own words, that maintaining that silence meant essentially being dishonest with the public, dodging questions, deflecting rumors, letting people believe whatever they wanted to believe, because protecting Peart's wishes mattered more than correcting the record. Think about what that actually required. 2 men, watching their closest friend and creative partner slowly decline, unable to talk about it with anyone outside a tight circle, while also fielding public confusion about why their band had gone quiet. That's an enormous weight to carry silently for 3.5 years. Neil Peart passed away on January 7, 2020. The news of his cancer diagnosis was only revealed publicly at the same time as the announcement of his death. The world found out he was sick, and that he had died within the same breath. Years later, during the opening night of his spoken word book tour, Geddy Lee finally talked in detail about the last time he saw Neil Peart alive. He described visiting Peart at his home in what would turn out to be Peart's final months. And what stood out most from that visit wasn't dramatic or cinematic, it was quiet. Peart, Lee said, had been spending some of his final time reflecting on the Rush catalog itself, going back and listening to the songs they'd spent decades writing and recording together. Not interviews, not documentaries, not public tributes. Just Peart, alone with the music, taking stock of everything the three of them had built. Then came the moment Lee has carried with him ever since. The two of them sat together on Peart's balcony, and Peart turned to him and told him how proud he was, proud of the life he'd spent as what he called the band's rhythm section, proud of what that had meant, proud of the decades they'd spent making that music together. There wasn't some big dramatic farewell speech. Lee described it as peaceful. They just sat there, watched parakeets fly into the nearby trees, and talked about the deeper meaning behind the songs they'd written together, and the kind of conversation two old friends have when neither one is performing for anyone, when it's just them. Lee didn't know, sitting there, that it would be the last time he'd see him. But looking back, that conversation, pride, gratitude, reflection, delivered quietly on a balcony with birds flying overhead, became the ending neither of them planned, but one that somehow fit everything Rush's music had always been about. When Geddy Lee sat down to write his memoir, My Effin' Life, he's spoken publicly about how difficult it was to put Peart's final months into words. This wasn't a chapter he could write clinically or from a distance. It required revisiting some of the most painful years of his life, while still honoring the privacy Peart had insisted on protecting even after his death. That tension is worth sitting with for a second. Peart spent his career writing lyrics about big ideas, freedom, individuality, mortality, meaning. And in his final years, he applied that same instinct toward his own story. He wanted control over how and whether it was told. Lee had to balance grief, loyalty, and honesty all at once, trying to give fans something true without betraying what his friend had asked of him. That's part of why this story took years to fully come out. It wasn't hidden out of secrecy for its own sake. It was hidden because that's exactly what Neil Peart wanted, right up until the end. For years after Peart's death, Lee and Lifeson were adamant about one thing. Rush, as a band, could not exist without Neil Peart. Not as a marketing decision, not out of stubbornness. Just a simple fact, the three of them were the band, and losing one of them meant the band, as it existed, was over. But recently, that's evolved. With the blessing of Peart's family, Forcella, who according to those close to the situation, felt that Neil had been ready to step back from touring anyway, and who suggested he'd likely have approached the idea of his music continuing with his own trademark dry humor, Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson made the decision to return to the stage. They're not calling it Rush reforming in the traditional sense. They've brought in talented guest drummers including drummer Anika Nilles to help perform the music live. And crucially, they've built daily tributes to Neil Peart directly into these shows, O the Matthew, making sure that even as the music continues, his presence and his legacy remain front and center, not something quietly worked around. It's a careful balance. Continue the music, honor the fans who've waited years to hear these songs performed live again, while making absolutely certain nobody mistakes this for pretending Neil Peart is replaceable. Based on how deliberately they've structured it, Warner So, the tributes, the framing, the way they talk about it publicly, my chance because with, that balance seems to be exactly the point. A balcony, some parakeets, a quiet conversation about pride and legacy between two friends who'd spent nearly 50 years making music together. That's how Geddy Lee's story of Neil Peart's final months actually ends. Not with the drama fans might expect from a rock and roll story, but with something a lot more human. Rush kept that secret for 3.5 years because that's what their friend asked of them. And now, they're bringing the music back the same way they've always done everything. Carefully, deliberately, and with Neil Peart's legacy built directly into every show. If you want to go deeper on this story, let me know in the comments. I can cover the upcoming 50-something tour celebrating 2112, dig into more stories from Geddy Lee's memoir My Effin' Life, or go back to the very beginning with the story of Neil Peart's legendary 1974 audition that got him into the band in the first place. Hit subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into music history. See you in the next one.